Hi, Mike.
Hi, Bob.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. Welcome to Blogging Heads TV.
Thank you. It's a real thrill.
Yeah, Mike, that had your customary irony in it. I'm not sure how sincerely you meant that.
Oh, deeply.
Yeah, well, that helps. Thanks. Now I believe you. I should say for our podcast listeners, you're Mike Kinsley. I'm Bob Wright. I was thinking about saying a little something about your background, just in case some of our younger viewers don't realize how much reverence they should have for you, Mike.
Oh, go ahead.
You know, once upon a time, there was an age before the Internet, and in those days, the essential media for influencing serious ideas about policy and politics were things called newspapers and magazines.
I remember them.
You remember that. Yeah. I knew I could count on you to remember that. And
you make it sound like
edited...
neither of us is really remembering much at the moment. But...
What's that? Yeah, well, it's a fading and distant memory, but it's a memory. You had been editor of Harper's. That's when you first got my attention. Then you were editor of the New Republic, and you turned, this is during the Reagan administration, you turned it into the hot political magazine in Washington, which really mattered then in a way it doesn't matter now. I'm not sure if we would say there is a hot magazine in Washington right now, but it wouldn't matter as much anyway in the age of the Internet. And it really mattered. And because of that, and because of your columns, you wrote the TRB column, which appeared in the Washington Post, and in fact, you're writing column now for Time, and but that inspired, I guess, a generation of journalists. In fact, we're going to talk later about how much heat you're taking for your view on the U.S. attorney scandal from liberal bloggers, and one of them, Josh Marshall, before criticizing you, goes out of his way to say that you, more than anybody else, are the person who got him into journalism, after which he proceeds to tear into you.
Yes. I mean, this is all... they say nice things as a setup, and then they say, well, he used to be really great, and now he's just a washed-up old has-been because he disagrees with me.
Yeah.
So I have to tell people how I first met you.
Oh, no.
Which is that you were hired by Marty Peretz to run the book division of the New Republic.
New Republic Books. And during 7 months as the editor of New Republic Books, I failed to acquire any books at all. But go ahead.
But you came to my office and you said that Marty had told you that you could write articles for the New Republic. That was part of the sell to get you to take the job. And I sort of thought, oh, my God, because there had been several editors of New Republic books. They'd all gotten this promise. And basically, these were not articles anyone would wish to publish. But you said you wanted to write one about a Supreme Court case about disability and alcoholism. And I said, yeah, send it to me. And then you called up on a Monday and said, I've got the article. It has to run this week, thus confirming all my prejudices again about editors of New Republic books. And you sent it to me, this is the first time ever I got an article on a disc. This already sounds incredibly old-fashioned. And
it happened to be in your preferred format of Xywrite,
it was in
right?
Xywrite, which was the word processor of choice for journalists then. And it was beautifully written and beautifully argued and required very little editing, and it was just a dream. And we've been pals ever since.
Well, it's nice of you to say that. I mean, I remember the first time I walked into when I walked into the New Republic office. I guess probably some weeks before I tried to sell that story to you. It was with a nearly religious sense of awe, because I was among your great admirers, and I mean it. It was like a kid meeting Santa Claus or something.
Well, great. Well, I'm not that old. Come on. And the awe, you didn't let the awe get in your way if you had a point you wished to argue.
Well, let's just say it faded after a while.
Well,
no, it's true. Anyway, you're a great figure in American journalism, and some, and everyone should share my reverence for you. it's true that we've had our arguments, and that's good because, as I think you know, the new Blogging Heads TV business model calls for me at some point to yell at you and threaten to hang up on you during this. That's the precedent. A proven traffic generation model established early a few days ago is to do that. So I hope you don't mind if that happens.
No, the sooner the better.
I said threaten. I didn't say I would actually hang up. You know, I guess you saw that clip. I don't know if you're aware of it. It was very widely picked up on blogs. This thing between Ann Althouse and...
I didn't completely understand it, although I certainly sympathized with Ann, I guess, the woman who felt that she'd been abused by the bloggers.
Well, good. She didn't get a high ratio of sympathy in the comments section. I'm glad. I'm sympathetic for... You're sympathetic because you recently got trashed by liberal bloggers. I'm sympathetic because I am myself prone to fly off the handle on Blogging Heads TV, and the one who succeeds in getting me to do it is somebody you know well, Mickey Kaus. He manages to get under my skin in ways that other people don't. But for whatever reason, I actually also have sympathy.
Well, can you just summarize for me and people who are watching this what it was that had upset her so much? Because she said to the other person there, you know, was clearly blindsided, and she had said something which struck her as utterly innocuous. And it set the other woman off in a way because it tapped into something that had happened to her. But just watching that, it wasn't entirely clear.
Okay, it starts with there is this blogger for a site that is called, I think, Feministing, and I guess her name is Jessica Valenti. And she former President Clinton once met with a bunch of bloggers, and she was one of them. And in the picture, she posed in a way, you know, President Clinton is like behind them and she's in the front row. And she did one of these, you know, quarter turns that you do when sometimes, you know, people on both sides kind of may face toward the center. Although not everyone did. Some people did, some people didn't. But Anne thought she was, I guess, purposefully posing in a way that would silhouette her breasts. Okay? Which is, of course, the kind of speculation you and I might make in a private conversation about someone. You might look at a picture and have that reaction. I'm not sure I personally would have chosen to blog about it, but for whatever reason, Ann did. And left-wing bloggers, who by and large are no fans of Ann's, just seized on this, and it became a big cause celeb to begin with, okay? So the backdrop of it, what Garant said was... You know, Ann was talking about how mean people on the left are to her, and Grant said, well, I mean, so far as I know, it basically started with this Jessica Valenti thing. And that's when Ann changed her demeanor, shall we say. And what was going on psychologically was Ann, I think, thought it was a setup. I mean, And I'm slightly culpable for this in a way I could go into, and I guess now that I've said that, I have to go into it.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if this is too much transparency or what. But the way it happened, anyway, what was going on in our head psychologically, we agree on topics in advance to discuss on Blogging Heads TV. Right. This was not one of the ones they'd agreed on. Ann thought this was an ambush, okay?
It was within the larger topic of people being rude on the internet, I guess, right? That you had decided you were going to talk about.
Well, I don't even know. The bloggers talk among themselves about what they want to talk about. But I'm sure that Jessica Valenti per se was not one of them, and I'm sure that the conversation they were in the middle of was about mean left-wing bloggers, right? So I guess from Grant's point of view, there was a legitimate context to bring it up in. Ann thought it was an ambush, and here's my culpability. The way this whole thing started was Grant, who had been on the show once before, who had been on Blogging once before, said, emailed and said maybe I could do one with Jessica Valenti. I did not, okay, I did not know she was the famous breast woman, okay, from Ann Althouse's famous blog. I did not know that. The way the name rang a bell was, I remember when Ann was on with Glenn Reynolds, Instapundit, you know, they were both doing a complaining session about mean left-wing bloggers. And at some point in that, it became clear to me, as I was kind of half listening to it, that Jessica Valenti was kind of their, in some sense, their antagonist or ideological opposite, okay? That's all I knew about, that's all that name kind of meant to me, okay? So I thought, wait a sec. I mean, first of all, when Garant says, I would like to do one with so-and-so, a few kind of alarm bells go off just because it tends to be the case that bloggers want to do them with people they agree with, and those aren't very interesting dialogues. And our viewers complain about them rightly if they're not illuminating. So first of all, I'm thinking, Secondly, I'm thinking, wait a second. My suspicion that you are an ideological, you're ideological akin to Jessica Valenti, meshes with my previous knowledge that Ann Althouse seems to be an ideological opponent. So I said, well, wait a second. You know, Ann Althouse already has a camera. Jessica Valenti's not equipped. Why don't you do one with Ann Althouse? Then, and she said, fine. That's all. But then, in proposing the solution to Ann, and in the interest of full transparency, I gave her that background. I said, you know, by the way, you know, Grant's suggested this, but I thought, you know, probably you two are more ideologically opposed or whatever, blah, blah, blah. So, Ann had in her mind the idea, whether right or not, that Garant and Jessica Valenti are kind of allies.
I see.
That increased the plausibility of the suspicion that this was an ambush. Never has this been told before, and I don't think I've betrayed anyone's confidence in explaining it.
And I think you've gone into it in sufficient detail to satisfy anyone.
Thanks. You know, that it was always your job to tell me that, Mike, as my editor, and you told me that often.
People are going to say, wait a minute, you know, you say you like people who disagree, so how come I'm doing it here with you? Because we don't disagree about a lot.
Well, first of all, when, you know, very often when someone I know does their first thing on Blogging Heads TV, I do it with them just to say, you know, just to welcome them. Thereafter, I usually try to line them up with people they'll disagree with more.
Oh, okay.
But, of course, you're also a famously contrary liberal. You have a little bit of that Mickey Kaus in you. I mean, Mickey considers himself a liberal, but we argue all the time. You have less of that than Mickey, but you have a little, and the U.S. Attorney scandal is a good example. Now, if you want to say anything else about that whole Ann Althouse thing, feel free. If not, we can then move on to the U.S. Attorney.
Well, no, I don't know what there is to say, but I agree with your viewers who say maybe, unfortunately, it makes for good video when people are really upset and threatening to leave.
Well,
Christopher Hitchens once stormed off the set of Crossfire when I was doing it many years ago. He was up against Ed Neese, and they started calling each other a liar. And one would say, don't call me a liar, you liar. I'm not a liar, you're a liar. And then Hitchens got up and stormed off, and the producers were in a bit of a panic, you know, because they went to a commercial, and then they were begging him to come back, and he wouldn't do it, and they waited until 10 seconds before the show came back to get rid of the chair, you know, so there wouldn't be an empty chair there. And then Hitchens came back saying he didn't realize that he hadn't counted the commercials correctly, and he thought the show was over. And that was very good video, too. So there's a tradition there.
It works, and the traffic numbers show it works. We don't, you know, we don't try to arrange these things. Wasn't expecting. I was expecting a little healthy ideological tension. And, you know, when I fly the handle with Mickey, that is absolutely, not plan. I often go in with the intention to maintain my calm because I know we're going to talk about the dreaded Ann Coulter and he's going to defend her. And I guess I just need to have less coffee before talking to Mickey or something. But I very well know the feeling of deep discomfort and regret after taping something that you know is going to stay in the archives forever, and you feel you've made a fool of yourself. I've done it more than once.
Well, it's called esprit d'escalier. You ever heard of that expression?
Mickey's the only person I've ever heard of from. There's the word staircase is in there somewhere?
Yeah. It means thoughts on the staircase, and basically it's that line you wish you'd thought of at dinner, and you think of it as you're going upstairs to bed or something like that.
Well, these are these emotions I wish I had not conveyed, but...
so it's sort of the other way around.
Related.
It's the same idea. All right, should we talk about the attorney generals?
Yeah, the U.S. Attorney scandal, you kind of minimize the importance of, and maybe you want to explain why, and a lot of your fellow liberals were quite disappointed.
I didn't really, but I had a couple of points. One of them was, make sure when you're dealing with something like this that you're not a victim of the whose ox is gored phenomenon. And, Clinton fired 93 of them. Bush fired 8. Now, already people are enraged that I even say that, because Clinton did it at the beginning of his term, and Bush did it in the middle, and Clinton, it was sort of an automatic thing, whereas Bush was only sort of, I said in what I wrote, I used the word defenestrating, throwing out the window, just a few. So that is a difference. But, there are other differences, and you can list the factors in 2 columns if you want. And I think that before you decide that one is an outrageous scandal, i.e. the Bush one, and one is utterly innocent, the Clinton one, you ought to look into your heart and say, well, what if it was the other way around? And the people who are most fierce about this, I wonder whether they would say, if Bush had fired all 93 and Clinton hadn't, that they wouldn't have regarded that as suspicious in any way. Or, if Clinton had fired 8, that they would have been outraged and said, this is much worse than firing all 93. Now, maybe they would. But I didn't sense, with those issues and the other questions about this, that I wasn't confident, at least, that I would not, take a different view if the situations had been switched. So that was all. I didn't say it wasn't a scandal. I said, let's look at this, and the total dismissal of what Clinton had done as utterly innocent, and the total condemnation of what Bush had done as transparently evil seemed a little bit, they were quick to come to it. Now, I have to say that what's come out since is not good for Bush. But the second point was, and this was sort of tongue-in-cheek, the Bush people lie so reflexively that the fact that Gonzales lied about this doesn't really prove that there was something wrong with it. I mean, bizarrely.
Well, okay. I mean, I would say 2 things. First of all, the question you're asking is a good one. Would Kevin Drum be saying the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot? That's a question we should all ask ourselves, just as a kind of checkup on our balance. But it's on the other hand not the only question you can ask, right? The question isn't just would Kevin Drum have gotten as outraged if this were Clinton, but from if Kevin Drum were the person you would like us all to be, that is completely objective and detached, would such a person, a detached person, have gotten equally upset about the two? And moreover, it's not even that, strictly speaking. The question is not, in other words, is not, I mean, if it turns out you should have gotten as upset at Clinton as this,
right.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't get you shouldn't get the question is in absolute terms, how much outrage is warranted in both cases? And I'm willing to entertain the possibility that the whole Clinton, house cleaning was an attempt to get rid of one prosecutor in Arkansas who wouldn't look into Whitewater. That's possible.
Well, I remember being furious at that issue when it happened in the beginning of the Clinton administration and thinking this was Republicans ginning up utter nonsense, and especially the Wall Street Journal. So when it came around and Democrats were accusing Bush of something similar, I felt, well, wait a minute, I want to be very careful. because it wasn't a theoretical comparison. I remember this because you and I are so old. I remember this Clinton thing and thinking this is a totally bum rap. So
yeah, well, and one reason you've been a great editor and writer is because you are intellectually honest in that way. You hold yourself to that standard, and I really mean that. There are no, I don't, the New Republic is thought of as an ideological magazine, but one thing we could always count on you as an editor for was to go ahead and anticipate the other, the response to what we were writing, because you have this ability to put yourself in the shoes of either side of the argument, which is very rare. But the question does remain, look, maybe it's possible you were wrong to be mad at the Republicans for getting outraged at Clinton. The question for now is it or not pernicious for Bush to do for the Bush administration to do what it did in this case? I think it is pernicious enough to warrant a little bit of outrage. And do you want to hear my case for that?
Oh, sure.
Well, you link to this David Brooks column, and nothing more arouses my critical sensibilities than somebody saying something nice about a David Brooks column. And I looked at it, and he made this distinction between the distinction itself is valid. He said, look, there's a legitimate sense in which there's supposed to be political influence from the president, right, going from the president to the U.S. attorneys. In other words, presidents may have policy priorities. They think, drug smuggling is now a big problem. They want to crack down, whatever. He said that's legit, but it's not legit to, do the shut down a legitimate, investigation into a scandal involving your party or something like that. That at least is he would accept that. He says, Carol Lam, she's one of the attorneys, Carol Lam seems to have been properly let go because she did not share the president's priorities on illegal immigration cases. Now, I would like to bring to your attention an email that was highlighted by Josh Marshall, who, as I mentioned before, expressed his reverence to you shortly before lighting into you over this. Much earlier on his blog, he brought to light this email that was sent from Sampson, Alberto Gonzalez's chief of staff, since departed, to who is testifying today, and will say, and may alter the context of this, but we should make it clear we haven't heard the testimony. Sent to the White House, I think to Harriet Miers in particular. Now, this is on the day that it is revealed in the news that Carol Lam is going to expand her investigation beyond Duke Cunningham to other Republicans, okay? That's just been reported. Later that day, Sampson sends an email to the White House counsel's office saying, you should call me, right? He says to call him on the phone, quote, to discuss, quote, the real problem we have right now with Carol Lam, unquote. Right. Now, I think, A, the timing is probably not a coincidence. B, it's very interesting that this is something he wants to talk to her about on the phone and not by email. There are various reasons for that. One of them is certainly you realize you're about to have a conversation you don't want to be on the record. Now,
right, of course. I mean, I hate to be an apologist. Anyone in business will know that anything to do with firing someone, you don't want to put in email. And those are, and I think every company in the world has a standard policy about that.
Okay. That's a legitimate point. The fact remains that the timing is very intriguing, right?
Right, I agree.
Okay. Now, what I would say, the way I would look at this is, as far as what the appropriate reaction is now, leaving aside what it should have been with Clinton, is this the kind of thing, assuming, that my sense of this is valid, which is that there's some real reason to believe that they were going to fire an attorney to stop an investigation into Republicans that so far as they knew was legitimate. If it is the case that that's the kind of thing we want to discourage in our political system, and you'd probably agree that it is, then there should be an uproar. That's the way you discourage these things, and we should look into it very deeply, and you would expect the other party to get especially outraged, and I'm glad they're doing that, especially since there's a couple of other cases that have somewhat partisan qualities as well. Now, of course...
Well, all right, can I just...
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I don't disagree with much of that at all. And if the Democrats were going through the 8 cases and sorting them out the way David Brooks suggested and the way you just did, even if they didn't, come out the same way, that would be a very good thing. And clearly, the business about Gonzalez, just blatantly lying about having anything to do with it, that puts it in a different category too.
Okay.
Yeah, but one of the things that bothered me about this is the sort of sense of, originally there were, I think, 7 or maybe 6 of these cases, and then people are adding them on, and they're not making the distinctions. And there's a lot of the rhetoric, not Josh Marshall. I mean, he's been great. He's gone into the details and everything. He's got the bit between his teeth, but that's fine. But this idea that it's political, therefore it's bad. I think not just in this case, but in general, is one of the really silly things about American politics. And people say they want. We may get into this if there's time. About the 2008 race. That they want someone who will rise above politics. Such and such an issue is too important for politics. Somebody or other, such as the U.S. Attorney, should be isolated from politics. And politics is democracy. And as you were saying, there are certain political aspects that ought to be and are perfectly legitimate as considerations when the president, as he has the right to do, picks the U.S. attorneys. And people were gliding over that point a lot. That doesn't say this isn't a scandal, that this isn't the wrong kind of politics. It looks like more and more like it well could have been. But all I did was say, look, the fact that it's politics doesn't make it obviously wrong.
Yeah.
And the Clinton comparison is a bit more trouble. I wish I could see you struggling a bit more over it.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's all fair. I mean, as to the fact that I don't think the fact that they fired 8 instead of the 3 kind of most obviously political, or however many seem plausibly political in a bad sense, I don't think that's anything like exoneration, because certainly you would expect them to have the presence of mind not to fire just the 3 that were most obviously political in a bad sense. But anyway, my general reaction to your critique is this is what made you a great editor. These are exactly the kinds of things you would have told us as we were writing about it, which would be good things to keep in mind, which would sharpen our focus.
People are really starting to wonder why I'm here.
What's that?
People are really starting to wonder why I'm here. You're being so nice.
Well, no, as I said, next time I hope to turn you over to, someone who will...
Mickey.
Yeah, I would. I would like to turn you over to Mickey, or turn Mickey over to you. But no, I mean... it's often that, it's standard procedure. I mean, the opposite recently happened, which is that Eli Lake, who is kind of a neoconservative, did his first one with a friend of his who happened to have done one already. It was Spencer Ackerman, an ideological opposite, but it was a friend of his. His friend ushered him onto the stage. We do this a lot, and then I did one with Eli just now. So.
And you murdered him.
No, I wouldn't say I murdered him. I would say we both made our points, but he's very good. So anyway, look, we just argued about an issue. This is totally legit. Now we may be moving on to some things we're going to argue about less. No, actually, if you want to talk about presidential candidates, that's really not ideological anyway. That's political, and we may have ideology is not the determinant of what you have to say about these things. Do you have any views on, for example, the now much discussed question of whether what effect the health of John Edwards' wife is going to have on his candidacy?
Well, I don't have anything profound to say about it. It's too bad. It's for any number of reasons. It's obviously tragic, but it is too bad specifically because Edwards was turning into a very interesting candidate before this, And now this will, of course, color anything that happens from now on. He was moving up, and I have to say he was sort of moving up in my own estimation. I really, in 2004, was appalled at the idea that a tort lawyer might be vice president, and that a tort lawyer was representing the Democratic Party, because I think that litigation does a lot of damage in our country, and I think.
This is another part of the neoliberal coming out, and you're right. This is a Charlie Peters line.
Well, yes, I suppose. I think I got it. I got it legitimately, not from Charlie.
You didn't steal it from him. It was a convergence of great minds.
Well,
but anyway, I mean, this is. I mean, we were talking about how you're not the. There are things about you liberals don't like. This is part of the neoliberal character of you. Is all I'm saying.
Okay. Well, anyway, I don't like it, and he got very rich off of punitive damages, and he is a brilliant speaker to the point that it's a little scary. First time I ever saw him on C-SPAN delivering a speech, I was absolutely absorbed, and sort of. An hour later, I sort of woke up and think, I disagree with everything he said. So I really was not in favor of him, but I was starting to warm up to him in the past few weeks, and I think other people were too. I don't know, partly I suppose because, of doubts about Hillary and doubts about Obama, although either one of them I would happily vote for and will.
Yeah, well, I had kind of the opposite history with him in the sense that I was briefly infatuated in 2004, largely because I was so desperate to find an alternative to Kerry, who I feared would be exactly the kind of disaster he was. And I was, and I thought, maybe Edwards is the hope. But, I mean, the thing I'm most concerned about as far as the future of America has to do with the realm of foreign policy. And he never kind of showed me that he kind of really got it by my definition, on that front. And so kind of faded. And the people I talked to in Washington said, yeah, he's a lightweight on foreign policy. He doesn't have a clue. So I had kind of, I would say, just kind of steadily lost interest in him. And in a way, the most redeeming characteristic he had before this cancer business, from my mind, was his wife. I find her a major asset, and always have. I would rather vote for her than for him. She seems to me so smart and likable as a person, and so much less kind of over polished than he is. She's just a tad earthier while still eloquent, so that she, to me, inspires actually more trust than he does.
Well, I think the problem is this is really terra incognita for everyone, but I think it's going to be very difficult because I think they did the right thing. I thought she put it extremely well when she said either you keep on doing what you were doing or you start dying. I thought that made total sense, and I think most people agree with that. The problem is going to be, it's hard to even say this without sounding, callous and Katie Curry-like. But, if she starts to get worse, the question will be, well, in the next, year, for Democrats, what's going to happen in the next year and a half before the election, and for the whole country, what's going to happen in the next 4 to 8 years?
Yeah, can the guy focus on the presidency as his wife is dying?
Right.
It's a good question. I mean, in sheerly crass political terms, the other side of the coin is a lot of people find it an inspiring story, and candidates in debate, maybe harder to attack him somehow on just issues.
Oh, sure.
On the other hand, there are people who will ask. I mean, of course, the story we've read in the media has been, you know, kind of Elizabeth Edwards insisted on this happening. I mean, that's obviously the spin they would want. I think they've kind of succeeded in imparting that. I have no idea what the truth is, but I think some people might wonder what kind of man, you know, if they hadn't put that spin on it, the suspicion would be this guy is just too ambitious, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that was one danger. I mean, I thought Anna Marie Cox at Time Magazine, the former Wonkette, put it very well when she said this was obviously a joint decision, as it should be. You know, even whether your spouse is sick or not. You know, whether to commit the family, and you have to commit the family to do something like this, and what. You know, if you were told, I'm trying to remember, she put it very well. If you were told you had 1 year to live, you would look at your list of things you wanted to accomplish and say, I can only do 1 or 2 of these. I'm going to pick the one that's very important. And what is most important to her, quite plausibly, is trying to get her husband elected president. So that seems like a perfectly rational explanation too.
Yeah. Well, we'll link to that piece. What do you think of Obama?
I think he's a natural politician, which is not to me an insult, because as I was saying, I think politics is democracy, and I think he's much more of a natural politician than Hillary. If something happens and he's got to react before he can consult his speech writers, he's much more likely to get it right than she is.
You think so?
Yeah.
So you think in retrospect then her remark, her chocolate chip cookie remark was a harbinger of a problem you see persisting? I mean, you know, if people don't recall, back when Clinton was first running for president, she was stressing her kind of feminist credentials or you know, her career woman credentials, and it was something like, you know, I'm not going to sit around baking chocolate chip cookies, forgetting about the fact that there probably are a few women who vote and actually bake chocolate chip cookies. You think that was actually indicative of a deep problem with her?
Well, she's become much more careful about that. She's smart. I mean, as I say, I'll happily vote for her. She's smart. She learns from experience, and that was certainly an experience. But I don't think her immediate instincts are as sharp as his are.
No, he seems a natural politically. He seems a natural, and I would like to be, as I find out more, I hope to be persuaded that he's the hope. It's hard to get a sense for what any of them would do on foreign policy, because all the thought is being given to what the American people want to hear about foreign policy. I'm afraid that in that sense they're all kind of black boxes, and we don't know what we'll get in the end. And as I said, that's what I'm paying particular attention to. And what about Richardson? Do you think he seems to me kind of hopeless as a candidate?
I basically agree. I think he's running for vice president, actually. But
he could do that.
Yeah. What about Bloomberg, Bob? He's the one Republican I can imagine voting for.
Well, I personally have not much libertarian in me, but just enough actually not to like the degree of enforcement of the no smoking thing he implemented in New York. But that's just me. As far as how he could do, it's interesting. I had a conversation just the other day, I guess it was Eli Lake, on Blogging Heads, where he was saying maybe Chuck Hagel winds up being vice presidential candidate on an independent ticket with Bloomberg at the head. And I was thinking, is it clear that Bloomberg, which one would be the head of that ticket? I mean, in a way, Hagel has more in the way of, gravitas, in the sense that he's been on the national stage, been a senator, he's a war hero. But I don't know. Do you see Bloomberg possibly winding up as an independent? And
well, I don't know. I don't. These independent things or these third-party things tend blossom and then fade as you get close to election. I mean, Ross Perot and all that, Ralph Nader. I don't believe that unless the country really it descends into much worse shape than it is at the moment, and there's a real crisis atmosphere, I can't imagine in the end a third party or independent candidate taking off. And I can't really see how Bloomberg is going to get the Republican nomination. But here's a guy who has succeeded in business, has succeeded in philanthropy, and has succeeded, most people think, in politics. He's been a very good mayor without all the baggage that Giuliani brought to that job. And, the people who want us to rise above politics and celebrate competency, they should like him. And he seems extraordinarily talented, reasonably modest, fairly personable, not a great politician in the way that any of the three leading Democrats are, Hillary, Obama, and Edwards. But still, I don't know. There is a group called Unity 08 here in Washington, which is pushing him, or they're having an online convention, and they're not pushing anyone particular, they say, but I think Bloomberg's the kind of guy they would like.
Well, I mean, of course, as for third-party candidates, they can be very influential even if they don't reach the point where they can win, and both of the cases you cited were. Nader and Perot both basically swung elections, right?
Well, yes, but both of them, their strength came from their views on specific issues, whereas Bloomberg's strength, if he has any, is basically people think he's really good, personally. So it's a little hard to see how you would shift to accommodate the reality of Bloomberg. You can't sort of will yourself more competent.
Yeah, well, Hegel is the one who has a cause, which is a really significant critique of foreign policy, and I think he actually feels that. But what I wonder, it certainly seems to me that I certainly don't see a constituency for him in the Republican Party. In other words, his combination of domestic conservatism and foreign policy, I think you would call it liberalism in the end. I don't see that in the Republican Party. I'm not sure I see a constituency outside of the Republican Party. Do you?
No, Chuck Hagel, he'd have to introduce himself to Americans, and I don't think they're going to be overwhelmed when they meet him.
And you agree that in comparing New York mayors, Giuliani ultimately, the personal baggage is going to catch up with him?
It's the personal baggage. It's the sense that he was some kind of fascist when he was mayor. Who knows? I can't. His moment is gone. We chew up and spit out famous people here, and he was very famous after 9/11, but that was already years ago. So.
Yeah, of course, the appeal of fascism kind of comes and goes, and I'm not really joking. That is to say, if we have another big terrorism event, really big, the appeal of somebody with authoritarian tendencies grows radically, I'm sorry to say.
I agree. Any of this blather that you and I are doing will seem totally irrelevant if something dramatic happens, depending on what that is.
And then you think Romney's Mormonism dooms him?
Pardon me?
You think Mitt Romney's Mormonism dooms him?
Well, I don't. The polls show 30% of people won't vote for a Mormon, period, which is extraordinarily high. So
that makes it hard.
It's hard to build up to a winning percentage, even if it's not a majority. If the most you can get is 70, if 30% of the people are chopped off at the beginning. My interesting question, Bob, is I'd like your view. Should it be determinative, or should it be? Is it legitimate? You wouldn't say I won't vote for Bloomberg because he's Jewish, even though there are many people who might well think that. They all of them would know that that's not the kind of thing you would say in public. But what about? And I tend to feel the same is true about Mormonism. But there are people who certainly would never say that about Jews or Christians or Muslims, who feel no compunction at all about saying that Mormonism is just too nutty a religion. What do you think?
I think, first of all, actually a lot of Americans would actually say it about Muslims, but not opinion leaders, not journalists, and so on. But I've been shocked. I mean, I've been shocked by the number of people who have basically said it, who are kind of journalists, kind of elites, you know. And I think the New Republic and Slate, I actually haven't read any of these pieces, so I shouldn't say. But I think, people have been not averse to kind of throwing out this vibe. I should say, I did one of these dialogues with Bruce Feiler. I don't know if you know Bruce, but, he wrote all these God books.
Feiler Faster thesis.
Feiler Faster, Walking the Bible, Where God Was Born, so on. Feiler Faster is his thesis, according as dubbed by Mickey and his blog. And we got into a certain amount of trouble because I asked him, do you think, is Mormonism really weirder, kind of theologically, than, say, Christianity? And he mentioned this, neither one of us kind of made a point of joking about it, but he mentioned that there's this, I guess, some kind of undergarments that Mormons or some Mormons wear ritually at some point in time. I don't know. See, I'm kind of smiling about it now. Sorry. Anyway, when he mentioned that Andrew Sullivan had posted these pictures on his blog, and I don't know if I laughed or smiled. It just struck me as an amusing image. And we got, a little viewer blowback saying that's not nice. I absolutely agree.
What was the blowback?
What's that?
What was the viewer blowback?
Oh, I just mean commenters on Blogging Heads TV saying that was not respectful. I personally am one who tries to go out of my way to express no disrespect of any religions. And the follow-up question I wish I had asked Bruce, and I'm sorry about whenever I laugh reflexively at an image without thinking about it, but the follow-up question I wish I'd asked Bruce is, but is there anything in their theology that, to an outsider, right? I mean, of course, religion never seems weird to believers, but to an outsider, is any more strange than virgin birth or resurrection from the dead and ascending to heaven, right? I mean,
right, and even in terms of present everyday habits, this weird underwear. Well, can I say a couple things? First of all, it's got to be legitimate to laugh. And, if Romney became president, or even if he doesn't, jokes about the underwear, I think, are fair. You're not human if you don't. But that doesn't mean that to take it seriously, that there's somehow this puts you beyond being able to be president because you wear this odd underwear. In terms of daily life, how different is that from all the, in my opinion, ridiculous rules of keeping kosher? I should add I'm Jewish. But even the meat and the milk and the seafood and all that, and 2 sets of plates for Thanksgiving, for Passover and all that. That seems to me, a Martian coming to look at the world would say that's as nutty as having to wear a special kind of religious underwear. And then finally, I would say, if the New Republic is it's not surprising that the New Republic would have a skeptical view of Islam.
You said
of
Islam or
Islam, Muslims.
Oh, yeah. That's actually not what I was talking about. The New Republic, I think, did a piece about Romney suggesting that the Mormonism... I know that John Judas wrote a piece either for them or the website in reaction against that. There was a piece that somehow, which I wish I had read, but I think to some extent suggested that yes, his Mormonism, sorry, that's too weird. You should be disqualified, kind of. And I'm sure I'm caricaturing it, but I actually think there was that piece in the New Republic. As far as anti-Muslim sentiment in the New Republic, I wouldn't say it's widespread within the New Republic. I think there are some corners from which it may or may not emanate, and you probably don't feel like elaborating on that, but you can. You brought it up.
I would say one very good thing that George Bush is probably the best thing I can say about George W. Bush is that he has taken the lead, really, since 9/11 in legitimizing and normalizing the Muslim religion. I think he made a great point about this is not about Islam. This is about a small sect of Islam. Many people would say that's not even true, but it's very good that he said that. And I think politicians who get up and make speeches about families and their churches, and then maybe for the past 50 years it's been churches and synagogues, and now it's almost routine. Politicians will say families and churches and synagogues and mosques, recognizing that there are several million Muslims in this country. That's all really good, and that's an unexpected good thing that came out of 9/11 and came out of George W. Bush.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he did not make missteps on that front. On the other hand, it seems to me he would have taken a pretty inept president to either say, the problem is all the Muslims in the world,
No, but
or to not say anything, right? I mean, I think it's what you would expect the president to do. He did it right. That's good. I don't think
you would necessarily expect, nor did I think it was even so obviously necessary to go to quite the lengths that he's gone to on this point. You may be right, and it may be because he is himself a deeply religious person. Right. Of course, then as someone who is not a deeply religious person, I start to wonder, well, if you're deeply religious, you have these very strong and rather specific beliefs. Other deeply religious people of different religions believe something completely different, equally deeply. And so I never quite understood, how do you pronounce it, ecumenism?
Ecumenicism, I think.
Yeah, the idea, it sounds like a conspiracy and restraint of trade to me. And we all agree.
Everything sounds like that to you, Mike.
Well, anyway, that's neither here nor there.
I mean, I think you're right that to the extent that you hang on to the details of religious belief in your faith, you cannot honestly claim that other religions have the details right, okay? You can't say, Jesus was the Son of God, and Jews are right in saying he wasn't the Son of God. You can't say both of those things.
Right.
There are two things you can do. One is you can fall back into an extremely liberal interpretation of your own theology, which is to say get very fuzzy about the Son of God part. And
well, what about the going to heaven and going to hell part? How do you get out of that?
Well, there has been that kind of adaptation on the part of Christian theology broadly. An interesting thing I didn't know until a year or two ago is that the official Catholic position of the Catholic Church is that, I guess this is I forget which pope. It's the second whatever thing, the big pronouncement that came about 30 years ago, I guess, is that you do not have to believe in Jesus, the Jesus, Son of God, to go to heaven. You do not have to be a Christian to go to heaven. That is the official position of the Catholic Church.
Someone ought to tell Pat Buchanan. We used to argue about that.
Well, he's probably heard about it. It's probably something he doesn't approve of. But religions have a tremendous ability to adapt over the long run to changing circumstances, and that's my hope about the present situation, is that they are very adaptable in terms of the degree of interfaith tolerance and so on. My concern is that it usually is a long-run process, and that, moreover, so far as I can tell, there are a lot of politicians who don't understand how you would pave the way for that to happen. I mean, in terms of American foreign policy, but I won't get off on that hobby horse.
No, but back to Mormonism. Is it a bar to you?
To me?
Yeah.
I don't think so. No. I could look into the details. I mean, it's funny. What about Scientology, where the thing about the theology is it's kind of no weirder in absolute terms than the idea of virgin birth and resurrection, but it has like a real science fiction quality, kind of, as I recall, and in fact was started by a science fiction writer, L. Ron Hubbard, who before starting it was quoted saying the way a guy would really make money is to start a religion. All of that does, maybe fill you with a certain amount of doubt. If you want to take an extreme case, it's probably Scientology more than Mormonism, but I don't honestly know what the... I suspect I'd agree with you that if you looked into the theological and ritual details of Mormonism from a truly detached perspective of an observer from Mars, it is not weirder than say, Christianity.
Jacob Weisberg wrote a piece in Slate where he went through the various Mormon doctrines, and he reached the conclusion that it is an abnormally nutty religion. And
fine, but I'm sure Jacob...
Just a second. Orrin Hatch, among others, took enormous offense at this. And Jacob's argument, which I couldn't in the end really buy, was that what made it sort of exceptionally abnormal was that all these miraculous events that the Latter-day Saints believe in happened within the past 100 years or 150 years, and that somehow other makes it they're too recent. Whereas, Jesus turning water into wine and so on and so forth all happened, if they did, 2,000 years ago. So that somehow other makes it okay. I couldn't quite go there with him.
That's related to a point I made to Bruce Feiler in our dialogue, which is that Joseph Smith made the mistake of trying to start a religion. I mean, look, it wasn't a mistake. It worked, I guess. But he tried this precarious business of trying to start a religion in an age where things are actually pretty well documented. So there are unfavorable newspaper articles about things he did and crimes he was accused of personally.
Imagine if he tried to do it in the age of the blog.
Right, exactly. It's gotten worse and worse and worse, but Jesus and Moses lived back before things were documented. So whole mythologies can take shape without any fear of disproof. I think that's maybe related to, I mean, if Jake's argument is what you're saying, I don't quite understand the idea that in this universe miracles could happen 2 millennia ago but can't happen now.
Well, I didn't quite. I'm probably not doing it justice. I hope you.
Okay, then we'll suspend disbelief on that until I've actually read it. Did you want to, before we go, say anything about this L.A. Times scandal? You were for a while the opinion editor at the L.A. Times, or whatever your title was. Yeah. You were in charge of both the editorial page and the op-ed page.
And the guy who quit last week had my job. That was the job he quit. Well, just in very brief, I thought that the L.A. Times sort of shot itself in the foot, to use a tired political cliche. There was no need at all for any of this. The publisher, the story in brief is that the editorial page editor was putting out a special supplement, and it was going to be edited by a Hollywood producer named Brian Grazer. Turned out that Brian Grazer hired a PR firm where the editorial page editor's girlfriend worked, and that was it. And David Hiller, the publisher, said from the very beginning that he didn't think there was any conflict of interest there, but that there was an appearance of a conflict of interest, which is, I think, a ridiculous concept that you hear all the time, especially for journalists, since the job of journalists is to sort out confusing appearances and say what is true. So either there was a conflict of interest or there wasn't. If there was no conflict of interest, to have it turn on appearances was ridiculous. And then so he had said it's perfectly okay to go ahead. We'll put in a little box in the supplement and say and let people know about this connection. And then overnight he changed his mind, and Andres Martinez, my protege in this job, got all hot and bothered and quit, which I think was a mistake on his part. So it was basically something out of nothing.
Yeah, I mean, my view on this, I don't know the details of the case. I mean, you actually hired Andres, right?
Yes.
Whom I've never met. I don't know him. I don't know why I'm on a first-name basis with him suddenly. But anyway, my view on the generic issue is maybe different from yours. It's that I kind of don't want to distinguish between conflict of interest and appearance of conflict. In a certain sense, I think the appearance of conflict for practical purposes is conflict. I mean, I'm not sure he should have been fired. I'll elaborate on that. But what I mean is this. You can never delve into a person's, you can rarely have the evidence to delve into a person's psyche and find out whether their decision-making really was influenced by a conflict of interest. The best we can do is say, look, if given human nature, if you put yourself in this circumstance, right, like if you put yourself in the case where this, military industrialist has contributed $7 million to your campaign, right, human nature would dictate that you will be unusually responsive to them. Not that should be illegal or anything. I'm just saying that's an example where a normal human's decision-making would be influenced. And it seems to me the only way to talk about conflict of interest is just ask, what would what would a normal person, how would their decision-making be influenced? And if you decide that it would be influenced beyond acceptable bounds, then maybe you have a conflict of interest. But I think you also have to allow for the degree of incest that is kind of intrinsic to human life, right? It's like...
Right, and not only that, but, you're saying it should be an objective standard about the structure of the arrangement, and
correct.
Not whether someone is internally corrupt. And that's true, but I would say, first of all, as you just said about incest, you can find a structure, you can dream up a reason why some structure is a conflict of interest, almost anything. And just to bring the conversation completely around to where we started, or almost started, with the U.S. Attorney's question, what is stopping people? What are the things in life that prevent you from seeing an issue clearly and speaking your true feelings about it? And, I think ideology is one, and another is what you may have said in the past about the issue. It's very hard to change your mind. And these things like that, are so much more important than whether your mother-in-law's first husband worked for a firm that did business with blah, blah, blah. And people zero in on these structural questions because they're objective. You can say, you don't have to guess at things. But, basically, people, this is why you have to struggle to be intellectually honest, I think. Because just the things in your life that cause you to not be intellectually honest, these structural questions are quite minor, I think.
Yeah. I basically agree. I think the expression of views is pervasively corrupted by what you fear people will think and blah, blah, blah. And in most cases, the kinds of things classified as conflict of interest are the least of the corrupting influences. I still think you should deal with those that are easy to deal with, but as I said, life is sufficiently complicated. It's like, sometimes for book reviews, they call you and ask you to review a book and say, do you know this person? And I usually can honestly say, no, I'm not, all that well kind of networked. But on the other hand, if you rule out all the people who, to some extent, in some sense, know the person or have some degree of social proximity, well, you've ruled out almost everyone who's actually qualified to review the book, given the way,
you might, the fact that someone knows the person might even add to the interest of the review.
Yeah. No, I think transparency is by and large the solution.
I'll give you another example if we have time. Do we?
We always have time on Blogging Heads.
All right. Well, this issue of people who write about stocks, and there are very firm rules that if you write about stocks in most newspapers, you're not allowed to own any. You have to put all your money in a blind mutual fund or something like that. But when they write their articles, who do they quote? They quote stockbrokers, stock analysts. And why do they do that? Because these people have skin in the game, and that's why people are interested in their opinion. I mean, the one person in the world who everyone would like to be able to tap into on where to put their money is probably Warren Buffett. And the reason is because he's got so much money in the game, and you trust him for that reason. You trust his advice as being smart.
Yeah, at the same time,
the idea that you should get someone who has no money in there. I don't know. It doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. But the transparency is crucial because obviously, if they own a stock, they do not have the incentive to be completely honest with you about what they feel. They don't want to tell people to sell the stock. So, but I think transparency is the solution.
Transparency is the solution to everything.
What's that? Oh,
these days.
Yeah, well, it's the age of transparency. Transparency is certainly easier than it used to be. Yeah. And this is this thing is a good example. People have forever. People will be able to to go back and watch this and conclude whatever they want about you and your biases, Mike.
Very exciting.
You know, to return to the, I want to say, I mean, on the point you were just talking about intellectual honesty, I would repeat, I mean, that was such a hallmark of working under you at the New Republic, was your intellectual honesty, and was almost unique strength. What?
I've gotten over that.
Well, good. I guess that happens to all of us eventually. I want to finally close in saying why, how it was this came to happen, which is that one of our commenters, and this gets back to an earlier theme of, you know, how mean should you be to, how critical should you be of religions. You know, the whole Amanda Marcotte controversy. She was the blogger for John Edwards, and she said snarky things about, I guess, you know, virgin birth or something. And in discussing her, somebody, maybe Ezra Klein on Blogging Heads, I guess referred to her as brilliant. And one of our commenters on our comment section said, would people quit referring to Amanda Marcotte as brilliant? Michael Kinsley is brilliant. Amanda Marcotte is blah, 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 blah. And I saw that and I thought, yeah, well, why isn't Mike on Blogging Heads? And I forwarded you that comment, and that's why you're here. So you're here because you're brilliant, Mike, and you proved it again, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And next time we'll match you up with somebody hostile.
I'm here because you flattered me by using that word, which is actually it's a terribly overused word.
Brilliant?
In the circles we travel in, yes.
Well, what adjective?
I think you're brilliant.
Well, that proves how overused it is. What adjective do you prefer for yourself?
Oh, for me, let's leave me out of it. But I think, you know, brilliant is just, it is a cliche. You don't think it's overused?
It has become overused, maybe more in Britain. Brits have a totally different way of using it. But, yeah. I mean, look, it's the fate of all laudatory adjectives to become overused. You want them to be applied to you when they're first gaining currency, and I don't even know what that word would be right now. But whatever it is, I'd be willing to apply it to you.
I don't know. This is not directly relevant, but I can't resist it. You know, I think someone, and maybe even the New Republic, had a contest once about if you could have any blurb on your book, what would it be? And the winner was 7-figure paperback sale.
I've always wanted a
blurb. There are better
to start
things than being brilliant.
Yeah. No, that would, well... there was a, this memory probably won't crystallize fast enough. I don't know. Somebody did something clever once, like naming their book New York Times bestseller or something, but anyway, I forget. Okay, well, again, thanks, and I hope this won't be the last time you're here.
We'll see.
Mike, that's not the traditionally courteous thing you say at the end.
Oh, I hope so.
Oh, that's you're getting there. You're getting there, and I think that's the best I can hope for. Okay, see you around.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye.